The lesson today, I want to put the verse up on the slide, but we're going to be in Jude verse 11, part 2 of verse 11, because we're going through this verse nice and slow. And this lesson today, every time we have what I consider a unit in metamorphosis is like 4 lessons, because then we have a quiz after that. And kind of in every unit, there's one lesson that's just a little bit deeper than the others. It's a little bit more, just deeper in the Bible. In the last unit, that angel one about the Noah and the angels and all that, that's what I would have called the deep lesson. This is a deep one today, because we're going to go into a story that spans a few chapters. We're not going to read every verse by any means. We're going to skip through it kind of quickly. But about a guy named Balaam. That's who the story is about today. So here's the verse that we've been going through. Jude is writing to warn people about apostates, and he says, "Woe to them! They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion." And so we're going to spend 3 weeks on this verse. Last week we talked about the way of Cain. And the way of Cain was coming to God and trying to make God accept you based on your fruit or your good works. Trying to come to God and say, well, here's all the good things I did, God, so you have to love me now. You have to let me into heaven now. Instead of just relying on Jesus. That was the way of Cain. This week, we're going to do the middle guy, Balaam. And it says they've gone into, rushed for profit into Balaam's error. And so we're going to talk about who was Balaam and what was his error. And then next week, we'll finish up this verse. And we're going to talk about who Korah was and what his rebellion was. Korah is her mom, and also the legend of Korah on Avatar. And who has heard of Korah in the Bible in here? Has anybody heard of Korah before? Emily. Okay. Anyone else? No one's heard of Korah, really. He's not a very big character. I didn't know who he was till I was studying this stuff in Jude. So we'll talk about who Korah is. He's not someone that a lot of people have heard of in the Bible, but we'll get into his story next week. Well, it's a guy. So let's start with Balaam. Turn to Numbers and go to chapter 22. Numbers is early on in the Bible. It's the 4th book. It's kind of a long book, but turn to Numbers 22. Now, has anyone ever heard of Balaam? Let me ask you, does anyone know who Balaam is? Do you know? You've heard? Okay. Not a lot of people have heard of Balaam either, but he's mentioned a whole lot in the Bible. He's mentioned more than Mary, the mother of Jesus. Balaam's a bigger character in the Bible than she is. Not a lot of people have even heard of Balaam. So what do you think Balaam's job is? Does anyone have a guess at his job? And I'll give you a hint. This is called Forecast from the Past. That might be a hint. What? Not a weatherman. That's a good guess. He's a prophet.
I was going to say that. I just couldn't remember what it was called.
He's a prophet. And he's not just a prophet. He's a prophet for hire. So that means he sells himself out to people to give them prophecies and say stuff about the future or whatever. And he collects money for it. And now you might be thinking, why would God give someone a spiritual gift? We'll get to that in a minute. But it's a very strange thing. He's a very strange character in the Bible. He's not a really mean guy, but he does a bad thing. He uses his prophetic gift to make money. He has some kind of special connection with God. He has some kind of special connection with God that he can talk to God and find out things about the future. But he would go and use that connection to get rich. So I want you guys to make a note on Balaam here, just about who he is. If I say, who's Balaam? We'll just put Balaam, put it in your own words if you want. He was a prophet. He used his spiritual gift of prophecy to make money. That's what Balaam did. So I want you guys just to make a note of that.
Can you just say prophet for profit just once?
He's a prophet for profit. His ministry is not a nonprofit organization.
He's not a nonprofit prophet.
He's not a nonprofit prophet. Yeah, there you go.
Sounds great.
He's a yeah. I'm going to stop there. Okay, now I want you to make one more note about him. You might be thinking, and this is what I'd be thinking, well, if he's using his prophetic gift selfishly, then why is God, through the Holy Spirit, even giving him a prophetic gift? Like, why is God even doing that for him in the first place if he's just going to use it for his own ends? And I want us to know the difference in fruits and gifts. We talk about spiritual gifts sometimes, and we talk about spiritual fruit, and those are not the same thing. The Holy Spirit will give people supernatural gifts, and that is a gift. It's on the basis of grace. It's not on the basis of how good they were. It's not just the super Christians get gifts. But the Holy Spirit, God, just decides, I'm going to give so-and-so this gift. And we've gone through talking about spiritual gifts in the Bible. So it's all on the basis of this 5-letter word right here, grace. And that's what you guys need to know, that grace is not something you earn. It's a gift. So that's what spiritual gifts are. Now, spiritual fruit, those are the good things that we do in our life. In the Bible, it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are the fruits of the Spirit. Those are things we produce in our own lives. So when I say here we produce the fruit based on merit, that means a merit is something you do in your own effort. So you don't just, God doesn't just give you peace or give you self-control. You practice peace and self-control in your life. And that makes it a fruit. It's something you produce. I mean, God can give you peace, but you become a peaceful person based on your own work that you put into it. So there's a difference in gifts, which are based on grace, and fruit, which is based on merit. Now, Balaam was given the gift of prophecy, but he only produced bad fruit with it because he was just using it selfishly. So he had the gift. And so you're like, well, why does Balaam get the gift if he's going to be bad? It's God's. I mean, it's something I just say. It's just what God decided to do. We don't have control over it. Balaam didn't have control over it. God totally chose it. So he did bad things with it. So in Balaam's story, Israel has been in the wilderness for, you guys remember they were supposed to be in the wilderness for 40 years. And so they're going through the wilderness, and they're defeating people left and right. There's people rising up against them. They're getting in conflicts, people trying to wipe them out. And Israel is beating these guys back hard. And they're just conquering people left and right. Well, now they're coming up on these people called the Moabites. They're from the nation of Moab. And these desert people are getting scared because Israel's coming after them. So the king of Moab, his name is Balak. And Balak goes to Balaam. And I know they have similar names. The king is named Balak. Balaam is the prophet. Balak goes to Balaam and he says, Balaam, I want you to put a curse on Israel. I want you to stand up here on a mountain and look down at their camp and curse them with your prophetic gift so that they will not be successful in battle anymore. That's what he wanted Balaam to do. Now, if you have trouble remembering, well, which one's Balak and which one's Balaam, like who's the king and who's the prophet, the way I remember it is the word Balak has the word K at the end of it. So, the letter K. Thank you. He has the letter K at the end of it. So K for king. He's the king of the Moabites. And he's also leading the Midianites. Balak is the king. Balaam is the prophet. So Balak is a bad guy, of course. But we might say, we might look at this situation. He says, well, okay, so you want Balaam to go up on a mountain and just what? Just say mean things about Israel? And that's going to somehow make Israel not do good in the battle? I mean, we might say, that sounds kind of superstitious. That sounds kind of silly. Like, what's that going to do? Well, Balak knew two things that a lot of Christians today don't figure out very well. Now, I want you to make a note here about what Balak knew. We'll get into the story in just a second. But this is what Balak knew. One, he knew that words have power. That our words are actually serious, how we use our words. And he knew that if Balaam, who's this prophet, gets up and curses Israel, he knows that that's actually going to do something. So he knows words have power. Now here's something else Balak knew that even Christians today don't understand a lot, is that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. That expression means we wrestle in the spiritual realm. There are angels and demons. The things that happen in the natural, there are things happening in the supernatural that are influencing the things that happen in the natural. So Balak knows that this spiritual curse, whatever it does in the spirit, it's going to have a natural effect against Israel. And so Balak takes that seriously. He knows these things. Christians today don't know this stuff all the time, but he did. Verse 5. Look at verse 5 there in Numbers 22. And Balak, the son of... I'm starting a little bit in verse 4. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. Then he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pether, which is near the river in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, "Look, a people has come from Egypt." And he's talking about the Israelites. "A people has come from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are sitting next to me. Therefore, please come at once, curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." So Balaam says, okay, he's been given the offer, and Balaam says, well, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to pray about it and talk to God about it, and see if I should do this thing where basically you're going to hire me to go curse the Israelites. Balaam says he's going to think about it. Now skip down to verse 9, because we're going to skip through these verses a little bit quickly to get through the whole story. So then God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" And Balaam said to God, "Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent to me, saying, 'Look, a people has come out of Egypt, and they cover the face of the earth. Come now and curse them for me, for perhaps I shall be able to overpower them and drive them out.' And God said to Balaam, 'You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed.' So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the princes of Balak, 'Go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to give me permission to go with you.'" So does Balaam understand God's position on the issue here? Balaam understands it. He says, God said not to do it. He goes back and does the right thing. He says, God told me not to go curse them, so I'm not going to do it. But we're going to see that Balaam actually really wants a shot at that money deep down. Even though it sounds like he's saying the right thing, well, I'm not going to go do it because God said not to. He's going to reveal his true intentions. Skip down to verse 20. We're going to see his true intentions in verse 20. So God came to Balaam at night and said to him, "If the men come to call you, rise and go with them. But only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do." So Balaam rose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the princes of Moab. Then God's anger was aroused because he went. Now, when we read that, God said to him, if they come to get you, you can go with them. That's what God told him. If they come to get you, you can go with them. And Balaam says, okay. And then it just says, and the next morning he got up and went with them. And God's anger was aroused against him. Now here's the question. Didn't God give him permission to go? Why is God angry at him? Because they didn't come for him. God said, if they come to get you, you can go with them. But Balaam just gets up and goes with them anyway. And that is why God got mad. And some people miss that detail. That's an important detail. And it shows the reason God's mad is because Balaam really just wants the money. Even though he says a good thing, he says, well, I'm not going to do it if God said no. It showed his true intention that he really wanted to go with them and get all this money. And so you just got to remember, sometimes in the Bible, characters will say a good thing. They'll say a really righteous or good sounding thing. And it'll look like they're a good person, but you really got to look at their actions. Because sometimes they say a nice thing in the Bible, but their actions don't really back it up. Like we just did this whole sermon series on Joab on Youth Wednesdays. And we talked about Joab for several weeks. Joab had some great quotes. I mean, he had some great quotes that you could put on your wall in your house and you'd be like, yeah, that's a great verse in the Bible. But Joab was not a godly man. And a lot of times he said good things, but he kind of had his own motivations a lot of times. So be careful when you're reading the Bible to note that you don't just judge someone based on what they say, but look at what they do. And in real life, too. When I say real life, I don't mean the Bible's not real life. I mean outside of the Bible. Okay. So Balaam just left and went with him. It's kind of showing this is kind of what he wanted to do all along. It reminded me of this old joke that a pastor gets home and he says to his wife, well, honey, I just got an offer at a bigger church in a bigger city with a bigger salary. I want to go upstairs and pray about it. And the wife says, okay, well, do you want me to go with you and pray with you? And he said, nope, you just stay down here and pack. So he's saying, he's already made up his mind what he wants to do, but he's saying, well, I'm going to go pray about it. And that's kind of what Balaam's doing here. He's kind of like that. So, all right, the next part of the story. So Balaam's going to go up this mountain. He's getting ready to curse Israel. And this is, if you've ever heard of Balaam, this is probably the part of Balaam's story that you've heard about because it's the weirdest part. So still in Numbers 22, go down to verse 22. Then God's anger was aroused because he went. And the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. And when it says the angel of the Lord, it's actually talking about Jesus. It's not super important in this story, but it's Jesus standing there actually coming down and trying to stop him. He was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. Now the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. And the donkey turned aside out of the way and went out into the field. So Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back onto the road. Now what's really shocking to me at this point in the story, you've heard this story before, the donkey can see Jesus up there, but the religious guy riding on the donkey can't see Jesus. It's kind of interesting. Think about that this week. The donkey could see Jesus, but the religious guy couldn't. Think about that. Okay, verse 24. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards, with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed herself against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck her again. Then the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right hand or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam. So Balaam's anger was aroused, and he struck the donkey with his staff. So 3 times now, the donkey has seen Jesus with a sword, and it tried to move out of the way, and Balaam got mad at it and smacked the donkey. Okay, now verse 28 this is where it gets really weird. Verse 28. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times?" So yes, the donkey talked to him. Awkward, yeah.
I don't know what it sounded like. Was it like a...
I don't know what it... I know if it had a human voice. But I did notice this time when I was going through it, it's a girl donkey. So it must have been a girl voice, if you're imagining it in your head.
Shrek.
Like on Shrek. It probably sounded like Eddie Murphy, but a girl Eddie Murphy. But I know, it's something that sounds so silly like you read in a kid's book. I mean, a talking donkey in the Bible, how could that even be real? What? Or like you see in a movie, yeah. But that is not even as silly as what happens in the next verse. So look at verse 29. Because then without missing a beat, Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you have abused me, I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you." So he just like responds to the donkey like he just talks to donkeys all the time. He's just like, the donkey's, "Why are you mad at me?" He says, "Because you abused me." He just says it right back to him. And it makes the story even funnier to me that he would even do that. Now, I don't think Balaam's a good man at all. And we'll see that in the story. He's not a good man. And the Bible is really, he's lifting him up as an apostate here. Jude's trying to say he's not a mean guy, but he's not a good guy. He's an apostate because he knows the truth and he walked away from it. But I bet Balaam must have lived a very interesting life, probably an exciting life. I mean, if he just talks to a donkey like it's nothing, he probably had a pretty interesting life. So look at verse 30. So the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours to this day? Was I ever disposed to do this to you?" So the donkey's talking to him back and says, "Have I ever treated you bad like this before?" Like the donkey's trying to say, if I've treated you bad like this before, or if I've never treated you bad before, and now I'm trying to get out of the way, I'm probably doing it for a good reason. And that's what the donkey's trying to communicate to him. And there's a good lesson there that if you ever get mad at somebody and you're like, why is so-and-so, I don't know if it's your parents or whatever, and you're like, well, why is this person, doing something I don't like? Well, a good lesson we can get from the donkey here, from the donkey, is that if someone's always been good to you and then they do something that you don't like, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt and think maybe they have a good reason for what they're doing, and before you get mad at them, like Balaam with the donkey here. But what's really funny, I want to throw it up here on the slide. If you look at the King James version of this verse where the donkey's asking him that, it's just got kind of a funny part in it. I'm not talking about the A word. It's not a bad word. It means donkey in the Bible. But that's what it says in the King James. But I just want to read this verse in the King James. So it says, "And the ass said to Balaam, Am I not thine ass upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay." So the donkey's talking like a person, and the person's talking like a donkey. I just thought that was kind of funny. All right, let's move on in the story. Look at verse 31. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand. And he bowed his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to stand against you because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have also killed you by now and let her live." And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the way against me. Now, therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back." And the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with these men, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall speak." So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. So it's a key point right there. God says, well, you can go on up the mountain and go forward with this whole cursing thing of Israel, but when it comes time to curse them, you only say the words that I give you to say. That's the key point of the story. So Balaam's only allowed to say what God puts in his mouth. Verse 41. So it was the next day that Balak took Balaam and brought him up to the high places of Baal, that from there he might observe the extent of the people. And I want to show you really quick what Balaam was looking at. So Balak takes Balaam up on top of this mountain to look down at the camp of Israel. And earlier in the book of Numbers, it shows, or it tells, how Israel was encamped. And so I made my own graph. It's specific in the Bible. It says 3 of the 12 tribes of Israel go this way, 3 tribes go that way, 3 tribes go that way, 3 tribes go that way, in each of the 4 directions. And right in the middle is the tabernacle. And it tells how many people were in this tribe, how many people were in this tribe, how many people were in this tribe, all the way around. It tells you how many people were camped. So I made a graph to kind of show you guys, this is the shape that they were camped in. And to do the graph, that picture of a tent, that's just a symbol, and it represents 10,000 Israelites, or of the men, because they kind of with the men. So each one of these little camps symbols, it represents where 10,000 Israelites camped. So if you put that and you actually map it out the way it describes it in the Bible, what shape does it make that they were camped in? A cross, yeah.
Kind of an even cross.
It's a kind of uneven cross, but it is a cross. You know, it's just one of those cool things in the Bible. This is Old Testament. This is 1,500 years before Jesus ever showed up. And there's a cross right there. And so I did a sermon at my parents' church last year. And the one Sunday that I missed last year, I was at my parents' church, and they had me as a guest speaker. And I told this story of Balaam. And like at the end of the sermon, I showed them. And by the way, this is what Balaam was looking at as kind of like the climax of the sermon. And I was making the point there that the cross reverses the curse. And so, you know, sin's brought a curse. And the cross undoes what the curse of sin did to the world. And so I went through a whole thing about that. The cross, though, it reverses the curse. And so Balaam's looking down, and this is what he sees. He doesn't know it's a cross. He doesn't know what a cross is. But it's actually in the shape of a cross, and this whole curse thing is not going to work. And so look at Numbers 23, the next chapter, and skip down to verse 7. This is what happens when Balaam opens his mouth and he's supposed to curse the children of Israel. Look at verse 7. He took up his oracle and he said, "Balak, the king of Moab, has brought me from Aram, from the mountains of the east. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed? And how shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. There, a people dwelling alone, not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number 1/4 of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his." So he didn't do a curse, he did a whole blessing over Israel right there. And Balak said to Balaam, "What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and look, you've blessed them bountifully." So he answered and said, "Must I not take heed to speak what the Lord has put into my mouth?" So that's what happened. They brought him up to curse him. He blessed him. Balak gets mad. The king of the Moabites says, "Okay, Balaam," and this is actually his plan next. He says, "Let's just go up on a higher mountain and let's try the curse thing over there." So we won't read through the whole story, but that's what they do. So they go up on a higher mountain, and he tells Balaam, okay, open your mouth and say the curse. And Balaam just says what God puts in his mouth. He does a big blessing again. So Balak says, let's try this one more time. So they go up on an even higher mountain, and they do it again. And once again, and my favorite part of the story, we're going to skip over it, but Balak just gets hopping mad, and he just says, don't try to bless him or curse him at all. He's like, just shut up, because he's getting so mad that it's not working. And in the third blessing, if you read it, it gives some beautiful prophecies about Jesus. It's some cool stuff. But we're going to skip over all that because we want to focus on the next part of the story. But you might be thinking here, well, what's wrong with Balaam? Because he seems like a pretty good guy. He's blessing Israel. How is he an apostate? Well, what happens next is going to show why he's called an apostate, because he has knowledge of the truth. He knows the right God. He knows the right people. He should be on Israel's side, but he likes the money. And so what he does is he tells the Moabites, he tells them, I cannot curse them because God will not let me curse them. All I can do is bless them. So this curse plan is not going to work. But I do know something that will work. And he tells Balak, take your best looking women and send them down to the camp and get them to entice the men, get them to take their men over and sleep with them or take them into their false sacrifices and stuff like that. And he says, if you can get Israel to sin, then God has to curse them. God has to punish them. He says, we can't curse them from up here, but if we get them to do something wrong and sin, then they're screwed because God's going to have to punish them. God's going to have to bring the hammer down. Do you think that plan's going to work? What do you think? I mean, yeah, it will work because that is one way to do it. So that was Balaam's plan. Balaam told the Moabites, this is what you got to do. So it's very evil because that's how the devil works. You know, the devil, if he could kill us, I mean, he would kill every single one of us in a second if he could. He just can't touch us. I mean, if he could hurt you any way that he would want to hurt you, he would do it if it was physically or emotionally or financially as you get older. I mean, any way the devil could hurt you, he would do it in a heartbeat, but he can't because God protects us. But he knows if he can get you to sin, if he can get you to screw up, well, then God has to discipline us. And so that's a way that he can make us bring punishment or bring a curse on ourselves, even though he can't do it himself. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Okay. So that was the plan. And skip down to verse 25. No, chapter 25. Skip down to Numbers chapter 25. So we're skipping a little bit of the story to get to the end of it. Now Israel remained in Acacia Grove, and the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And so Israel was joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. So what's going on here, lots of times in the Bible, the way that people would worship their false gods is they would build like a temple to a false god, and then they would go in and have sexual relations in there. And they would call that worship. I mean, it sounds really weird to us, but that's how they did it all through the Bible. Not in Israel, not in how God would set it up, the right God, our God. You know, that's not what God said to do. But that is what these false idol worshipers would do. They'd go in and they would have sex in their temples to their false idols and stuff like that. So that was just kind of the program. They were getting the Israelites to do it. Moses, when he heard about it, Moses gets so mad, he says, anybody who has went into one of these false temples and tried to have sexual relations in there with a Moabite woman, they're going to be put to death. And so Moses just brings the hammer down. Look at verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and hang the offenders before the Lord out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, every one of you must kill these men who were joined to the Baal of Peor. Now, as all this is going on, one guy does something. He just decides to be a butt. I mean, all this evil stuff's going on. And one Israelite guy, he basically says to his Moabite girlfriend, he's like, well, hey, lady, I went and had sex in your temple. Why don't you come into our tabernacle for our God and we'll have sex in there? I mean, And in the middle of all this stuff that they're putting people to death for this, he just decides, you might not think that but is the best theological word to describe him, but I think that's the perfect word personally. That this guy is just, there's no other thing for it. He's being a but. So he brings her there. Look at verse 6. And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Now when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. Those who died in the plague were 24,000. I mean, if he was running a spear through both of them at the same time, it's not hard to imagine what they were doing right there in God's tabernacle. And so they were killed on the spot. Now, that is the whole big story of Balaam and what he did. He couldn't get Israel to curse, but he knew the trick. That, when you're one of God's children, he kind of puts an umbrella of protection over you. So the devil can't just kill you. He can't just hurt you always directly. But if he can get you to step out from underneath that umbrella, well, then God will have to take care of you. So it's a very evil trick. But it worked on Israel, and they took care of it. But Jude is warning us about the error of Balaam. And so what is the error of Balaam? Well, I want you guys to make a note of it here. The error of Balaam is using God's gifts for personal gain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They were sacrificing eternal rewards just to please their momentary desires. That is what Balaam would want to get people to do. That's what he was doing. Okay, in your Bibles, we're going to go to the other end of our Bibles. Turn to 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter 2, remember 2 Peter 2 is the parallel chapter to Jude. And that's a quiz thing, which we've covered in the past, but keep note of that. So 2 Peter 2 talks about the same stuff Jude talks about. Look at verse 15. It says, they have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. Don't lose your place in that book yet, but make a note of this too. It mentioned right there, the way of Balaam, which is something a little bit different, but mostly the same as the error of Balaam. The way of Balaam is greed that leads to sin. When you're so greedy that it leads you to do something else. Greed's already a sin. Greed is already bad. But when you go into the way of Balaam, it's whenever your greed leads you to do another sin on top of that. So it's like a worse form of greed. So make a note of that too. One thing that might be a little confusing. Okay, so last week we talked about the way of Cain. We talked about the way of Cain, and that's what it was all about. And this week I talked about the error of Balaam, but also there's the way of Balaam. So don't get the way of Cain mixed up with the way of Balaam. But I do want you to know both. If you remember who these men are and what their different stories were, you probably won't get them confused. You might just have to think about it for a second. Okay, y'all got that written down? One more place I want you to turn. Revelation 2. Last book in the Bible. So Revelation 2, it's a letter that's being written to a church called Pergamus. And we're not going to read the whole letter, but I want you to look at verse 14. It says in Revelation 2, verse 14, but I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. So it mentions one more thing about Balaam there. It says the doctrine of Balaam. And I want you guys to make a note of the doctrine of Balaam. The doctrine of Balaam is that even if the devil can't curse you, he can tempt you to sin, and then God will curse you. Now, if you want to put that in your own words, maybe you have a shorter way to put that, that's fine. I wish there was like a one word for it. There's really not. I don't know what word you would use to describe this whole concept here. We just call it the doctrine of Balaam. And so it's there in the Bible. The doctrine of Balaam. Devil can't just hurt you directly, but if he can get you to sin, then God has to discipline you. I just want to ask before we go, is the error of Balaam something that's being committed today? Are there pastors who would go into this stuff today? that we need to watch out for? Well, I would say, yeah. I mean, otherwise Jude is outdated. But I think, no, it's more relevant than ever. I think there's people we should not necessarily, maybe not watch out for, but just be cautious of. Or, yeah, you could say watch out for. Doesn't mean that if a pastor asks for money, there's some evil person trying to make you poor and get rich off of you. This is not necessarily what's going to happen, but we do need to watch out that there's people like that out there who would use ministry, who would use God's gifts, who would use a church to get rich instead of for like actual good purposes. So I don't know if this is even accurate. Here's a list of the 10 wealthiest pastors in the world. And I'm not saying all the people on this list are charlatans, people trying to take advantage of others. But I want to make a comment about them. So 10, Joseph Prince. 9, Chris Okoti. 8, Matthew Ashimolowo. 7, I know I'm probably skewering some of these names. I'm just reading through them. 7, T.B. Joshua. 6, T.D. Jakes. 5, Billy Graham. 4, Creflo Dollar. That's the guy we had the video about earlier. 3, Benny Hinn. 2, Chris Oklahoma. And 1, David Oyedepo. Okay. Now, let me comment one thing. If you're like me and you're wondering, I don't know who even most of these people are. Like, these are the wealthiest pastors and I've never heard of them. 5 out of the 10 wealthiest pastors in the world are all in Nigeria, in Africa. And the reason that there's so many wealthy pastors over there, Africa has a really huge problem with prosperity preachers. And that's people who do just try to make money off of Christians, and they say, send us a gift. If you send us $60, next week God's going to drop $600 into your bank account. They say stuff like that. They have a really big problem with that. Now, that happens a lot in America, but I don't know if people fall for it as much. It's a huge issue in Africa. People think that the best way to make money in Africa is to give to a church, and that God's going to bless them so much that they'll get a blessing 10 times or 100 times better than whatever they put in the offering bucket. That is not what the Bible says. We are supposed to give. God promises that if you give to him and tithe and all that stuff, God promises he will take care of you. That's the promise. God never promises he's going to make you rich. He's not going to make you a millionaire because you put money in the offering plate. If he did, wouldn't there be a lot more millionaires at our church than there are? That is not the promise. The promise is that he will take care of you, and he will. But there's lots of people who will twist the Bible and twist verses to say God wants to make you rich and all that kind of stuff. So you got to be careful about that. In Africa, and I read articles, I'm constantly reading articles about prosperity preachers from African pastors. They'll write about how it's a huge problem. And I'm always thinking, I know it's a bad thing, but why do they always write about this all the time? Well, I didn't know this, but Africa just has a huge problem with people who do that. They use emotion and manipulate people and get them to send money. And they'll call it, sometimes they'll say it's a seed gift, and they'll say, send us your seed, plant your seed. You send us $138, and next week there's going to be $1,138 in your account. They will say stuff like that to get people to send money. Now, that doesn't mean just because somebody is wealthy, just because someone's wealthy, it does not mean necessarily that they're out to get you. Okay, one name on this list that everybody probably knows, Billy Graham. Okay, I don't think he's a false teacher whatsoever. I don't know anything about these guys. I don't like Joseph Prince. I think he's kind of sketchy. I don't like T.D. Jakes. But I don't know anything about a lot of these guys. And so when I talk about this, I'm not judging them. I was just saying these are the 10 wealthiest pastors in the world. And it makes me a little bit uncomfortable when Jesus said, it is really, really hard for a rich man to get into heaven. It makes me uncomfortable to think, why would you want to be a rich man? Because Jesus said it can be he says it's almost impossible for a rich man to get to heaven. So it is a big hindrance. It can really get people off track easily. So yeah, it makes me uncomfortable to think, I would not want to be one of the 10 wealthiest pastors in the world. You cannot pay me enough money to want to be on this list. Which is kind of a pun, because how you get on that list is you get paid a bunch of money. But you know what? I would not want to be one of the 10 wealthiest pastors, because Jesus said it is really hard for a rich man to get into heaven. Now, what some people do who are very wealthy, like Christians, they will do something that's called a reverse tithe. And because the Bible says give 10% to God, sometimes pastors will, if they're really wealthy because they have book deals or something like that, they will keep 10% of their money and give 90% to God. That's very generous. The Bible doesn't say you have to do that, but that's what a lot of them will do, because they'll say, well, I make a bunch of money, so I'm going to reverse tithe. I'm going to just keep 10% and live off that. For all I know, Billy Graham has said he had $25 million. I don't know if it's accurate. For all I know, maybe Billy Graham did that. He keeps 10% and gives 90% away. I don't know. So I don't judge anybody who's like on that list. I just say it does make me a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. So the lesson today is just watch out for people who would try to use religion to just get rich off of it, to try to just make a bunch of money. There is a church down in Dallas, I think, First Baptist of Dallas, and they were recently bragging about it. Well, we just had a $130 million renovation, and there's a picture of it. It's a beautiful looking church.
That's the ugliest thing I think I've ever seen.
You don't like it?
I hate that. Is that a fountain in the middle?
It's got a fountain. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's just ugly.
I would not brag about having the most expensive church in the world. That would not be something I'd be proud of, because there's lots of better things they could put money into than a fountain or something like that. So, or some people might say it's an ugly church. Anyway, I thought it looked really nice in the pictures. But the lesson that what we're learning there about Balaam is watch out for people who would use religion to try to get rich. One night I was driving we were riding somewhere in my car, and there was this older pastor. He's been dead for several years, but his radio program is still on the air. His name's J. Vernon McGee, and he was going on and on warning about the wicked rich man. The wicked rich man, this and that, He's here. He's a rich man if there ever was one. But, okay, any questions? Yeah, Sarah, I was going to ask if there's any questions about Balaam or the lesson today before we go. Because they run his old programs that he recorded when he was still alive. Yeah, like reruns, like Dukes of Hazzard or something. Well, I think that's so cool, because then it's just think how someone can be dead, and maybe they've been dead for 20 years, but maybe someone tunes in and hears their radio program, and they still get saved from it. I just think that's so cool that someone can still have that influence for decades after they die. I think that's a neat thing. Okay, hey guys, let's pray real quick, and I want to let you guys go.